My name's Tom Bates. I'm with the Actian Corporation, which I'm sure many of you have never heard of, so I'll talk a little bit about Actian very briefly. This presentation is titled, obviously, Edge and Offline-First App Data Management in 5G Devices. So what we're talking about is really what we believe is the need for a fully capable database management system on Android. And we'll talk a little bit about what we think that means, why we think you need that, all right? And of course, I work for Actian, so we'll talk a little bit about why we think Actian Zen will satisfy that. And then if we have time, I have one use case from a customer we have in Canada that, might give an example of why they chose us. In that case, it was over SQLite. And we choose SQLite because it's been around a long time. It's everywhere, right? Most people have used it at least once. And we'll begin there. So Actian has been around in several forms for, I guess, probably 30 years. They started way back doing databases for DOS. So the guys who wrote that originally, they're retired and off doing stuff. But they built a really good core engine that could run on a very small machine, right, with very little horsepower. And that machine's been, that software base has been developed and improved for 30 years. We're up to version 14 now. I've been with the company a little over 10 years. My background is operating systems and database. I moved into database about 10, 15 years ago, and I've been a database guy ever since. So I'm gonna let you know to begin with that we're not an Android company, right? We don't do Android apps. We do database, and we support our database on every platform that we can find that we think we can offer something for. So we run on Windows, Linux, Mac, iOS, Android. We've got a couple of IoT boards. We just did a proof of concept on a Jetson board. So since we're so old, we're small and fast, and we run well on just about anything. That's the idea. So we see three needs for smart devices in 5G, and I throw 5G in there because I think this is my second Android show, and I think a lot of people think that 5G is just going to solve everything, right? Because it's so fast, you don't have to worry about it. Just do everything to the cloud, and everything's going to be golden, right? Well, we think that there's going to be so much increase in data and so much need for analytics that if you try to send everything up to the cloud and back, you're going to have response time problems, cost problems, right, if you're paying for that cloud as a service. So Android devices are so powerful now that we feel that you can do most of that on the phone and not have to worry about connectivity, not have to worry about paying for that round trip and all that storage up top. It's application dependent, of course. So my bullets here, on-device analytics, synchronization. People are always worried about synchronization. We'll talk about that. I know in the booth, people have mentioned to me a few products that automatically synchronize data between the phone and the cloud. That's not what we do. And there's a reason we don't do that. And we think we have a good story there. And then just optimizing your data management. So what do we mean by on-device analytics? Well, there's this term that's relatively new to me called offline-first. And the idea being that you design your app so that it runs well offline. That's not an afterthought. You design that from the beginning. You assume there's going to be offline times. You may even want offline times, right? So you don't have to pay for the bandwidth. You don't have to support all that. This sounds pretty easy to explain, but it's hard to do. I'm sure many of you have tried to do something like this, right? How do you maintain that data synchronization? All that sort of thing. Database-driven synchronization. So, yeah, you've got to be able to do this. You've got to be able to persist the data locally And you need to be able to perform. One of the things we've seen when we've talked to people is that they run a different database system on their phone, if they run anything at all, right? It might just be flat files, than they do in the cloud. So there's this issue of well, I've got data that's in one format on my phone, and now I'm trying to write it to a different database up in the cloud, and I've got to transform that data, right? ETL, extract, transform, and load. We think we have a solution for that as well, because Zen runs both on your phone and in the cloud or on your server, on-premise server. And because it's the same database everywhere, you avoid this ETL. So it's optimized. You don't have to transform any data. And Zen's written in a way that it doesn't matter whether you're on ARM or Intel, you're running iOS, Android, whether your server is a Windows server or Linux server. The data format's exactly the same. So you can literally take a file that you've created that you've persisted on your Android, copy it to any of the platforms we support, and read it right there. So describing what I've said, so we've come up with this data management wish list, right? If we were an Android developer talking to some people, what would they want? Well, the first thing, if you're going to move a full data management system to the phone, obviously there's no database administrator, right? So forget anything you might have, any thoughts you might have of that. We understand fully that there's not going to be an Oracle DBA or a MySQL DBA, right, tuning your phone for your database management system. A lot of people want NoSQL access for performance, or JSON objects, persisting objects, right? They don't want to deal with the SQL fixed table, fixed row methodology, and so we understand that. Data portability, I mentioned that. The data you write is going to look the same no matter what device or what architecture that device is running. Background compatibility is an issue, right? Because if you've got you're pushing out new versions, that data that you wrote using the old version has to work, right? And that's something we'd want. The API needs to be simple. It needs to be consistent on every platform. That's an example of if you have different data systems depending on whether you're on server or on the phone, you're going to have multiple APIs, right? Extensibility. Since we're arguing that the needs for database on the phone are going to only grow over time, the amount of data and the amount of analytics you want to do, no one can anticipate all that, right? So you can't pick a system that you're already kind of maxing out what it can do with your current app. You need to think about, well, in 10 years, what might we want to be doing, right? So the database should be able to handle that. And then zero field support. I've been doing this a while, and the biggest expense I've ever encountered in any product is maintenance, right? Development's actually pretty simple, right? You get a bunch of people who know how to write code. Somebody's got a clever design. That's not a problem. Maintaining it is a problem. So if you have this database management system that's consistent everywhere and just works, that eliminates a whole, instead of rolling your own, for example, right? That eliminates a whole area that you have to worry about supporting. If there's any questions at any time, feel free to stop me. So it's zero database. I mentioned this a little bit, just set it and forget it. People get a little nervous when we say database on the phone because they may have been around a while, they may have been in a different environment, and they think of database administrators and how much money they make and what they do for you. Whatever you pick has to just work. You can't defragment files, you can't have trouble applying patches. Everything just has to work. There can't be a DBA, right? Especially if you have thousands and thousands of these applications out there. NoSQL. NoSQL is very, exciting. It's, I guess the excitement about it is kind of, come down a little bit, diminished a little bit. But people want NoSQL for performance, and that's a good point. We believe, though, that NoSQL doesn't mean not being ACID. And if you're not familiar with database, you may not know what ACID means, but that just basically means when you write it to the file and it says it's been written, it's actually been written, right? And we think that's important. Some NoSQL implementations get their speed by asynchronous writes and you've been told it's been written, but it actually hasn't been written. It's going to be written at some point in the future. I think that's a dangerous thing, and if you can get the performance and still guarantee things like that, that changes have actually been committed, that's a relief to everybody, right? And it would be great if you had a single API for managing your data. So the way you create a record or retrieve a record on your phone should look exactly like the way you do it on the server or in the gateway. If you're in management, that way you can take the programmer who knows how to write on your phone, and they're going to be able to take a lot of that knowledge with them to the server and vice versa. Data portability, I talked about this sooner. Some database systems get around this by, and it's not around it, it's cool, right? JSON is cool, right? They just write JSON, and JSON is JSON. It's just a stream of characters, and you can read it and write it everywhere, right? JSON has some performance issues, right? Because it's not fixed format. You have to reinterpret it. Queries can be slower than a more traditional fixed format record. So this kind of ties into extensibility. You should be able to pick and choose based on your app, right? Your needs over time may change. You may be doing JSON and then you find you have a bottleneck somewhere and you want to change it to something a little more performant. So we want a database system that's not tied to one, yet supports everything. And it sounds a little pie in the sky, but as we'll see later when I talk about Zen, when you've got a system that's been around a long time and was enterprise level for a long time, the feature set has become quite rich. It's not like there's a bunch of us back in Austin just banging out features as fast as we can, right? These features are there. All we had to do was put it on Android. And since Android looks a lot like Linux, it wasn't that hard, quite frankly. Data versioning, that's another thing. When you push a new version of this down to your phone, you don't want to have to rebuild files. You don't want to have to copy data from one file format to the other, right? You want something that's going to be consistent and can tolerate version upgrades without causing you any sort of trouble, right? That's the last thing you want to be worried about. And then data portability also ties into ETL. I talked about that before. So moving data from Android up to the server or from the server down to, iOS or Android, if you can avoid any kind of data transformation, and if it's an encrypted data, which it probably is, you don't want to have to de-encrypt and re-encrypt because that makes security people really nervous because there's a moment in time where it's unencrypted. That would be great. And if your database system is the same on the phone as it is in the server and the gateway, you don't have to worry about that. It always stays encrypted. Backward compatibility, I spoke to this a little bit earlier. We have a long history of supporting backward compatibility because we have a long history of supporting embedded applications. So before smartphones, they were just purpose-built devices, right? Point of sale, the ticket machine at small airports, things like that. They all have the same kind of issues, right? There's hundreds or thousands of these things. There's version issues. So backward compatibility should be a top priority. If somebody doesn't take an update, well, you don't want to break them, right? Or let's say you want to update the server and the client to the latest version. Well, the server goes up a version, and the clients are going to go up a version over time, perhaps. You want to make sure those all work together. We're still on the wish list here, the API. So auto timestamping, right, time series data, that's just a given now. You really should have that. If you're not using it now, you're going to find out a reason why you need it at some point. I'm pretty darn sure. And these kind of sound like buzzers, right? I feel like a commercial. Performance and flexibility without complexity. Well, that's what we all want, right? So if it's hard to use, you're probably going to go somewhere else. Or it's going to be difficult to train people up in it. You don't want that. And you want to support as many languages as you want, right? So I wrote my first Android app about 2 months ago. And I wrote it using Java because that's what you write Java. You write Android apps in, right? And then I'm talking to some guys at the booth yesterday and they're like, you're still using Java? Right, because there's a new language now, right? So if your API is designed specifically for a particular language, it's not designed with the tolerance for new languages in mind, you can find yourself in trouble, right? You're going to have to change database systems or be stuck with a language and then try to hire guys and gals that know how to code in that language. And then extensibility. This is what I talked about earlier. You don't know everything you're going to need now, right? I think it was Steve Jobs who said, you can't see the dots going forward, you can only see the dots going backwards when you connect the line, right? So you want to make sure that if you're going to go to the trouble of having a database system on your phone and maybe moving it up to the server as well, you don't want to be tied into something that's limited. And what I mean by that is limited to just SQL, they're limited to just NoSQL, or are limited to single-threaded, or limited to single user or single device, right? So you should have that in mind. Plus you might start wanting to do more analytics. We have one customer we're working with and they want to do image recognition locally, right? If you were trying to do that with something less than a full database system, it would be difficult, right? So they're really excited that they have a full database system and with all the capabilities a database system has, and they're able to run it on an Android device. And then zero field support. I talked about that as well. Not only can the database help you out by being consistent, if it can never be the reason for a field support call or issue, that would be great, right? Because think about how much of your code is written dealing with data. So I'm not saying that we never have field support calls among our customers, but I am saying it's very rare, and once again, it's because it's so mature. Okay, so that was the beginning of my marketing pitch, and here's the rest of it. So we've established this wish list, right? And I think it's a fair wish list, even if you don't go with Acti and Zen. I mean, extensibility, having SQL and NoSQL, having transactions if you want them, right? Having multi-thread support so you don't have to worry about synchronization. You crank off as many threads as you want. They all write and read the database and everybody's consistent. Acti and Zen, we really think we have something here. I'll just run through this real quick. It does work inside the Android SDK. That's how I wrote my demo. It's very simple. It's just a library and a header file in C++, for example. And with mine, I didn't even bother to use the Java one. I just wrote a couple of JNI interfaces and called straight down into the C++ library. I pointed the Android SDK at the include file in the libraries, and I built an Android app. I feel pretty proud of myself because I'm not a GUI guy. I Googled how to do the GUI, and if you come by the booth, you can see my poor man's sound meter that I wrote. We have full AES 256 encryption, and like I said, when you just say that you want this file that you're persisting the data to be encrypted, you give us a key, and then whenever you do a write, that data is encrypted before it's persisted. It's actually encrypted when it goes into memory. Stays encrypted without being touched all the way into it's persisted. If you're talking to a server, same thing. And when you read the data, we de-encrypt it and give it to you de-encrypted. It's that simple. Another thing that we have over some of the current database systems is client server. So every Zen database has client server support built into it. So that's true even for the library version that we run on Android. So you could take the exact same code that you've written to persist data, store data locally on your Android, and by changing what you point at when you create the connection, you could be talking to a server. And then I talked a little bit down here, the last couple bullets. We have Zen Edge, is what I was talking about, the server. We have this concept of a 3-tier. I don't know if it makes a lot of sense in the Android world, but the IoT guys really like this, right? So they've got these smart meters and smart pumps, and they're running the Edge, the one on the Edge, the client version. And a lot of those run Android embedded, actually. And then they've got gateways that might be for the factory, and then they have something on a server. So there's this 3-tier approach, but you don't have to use 3-tier. You can go straight to the Zen Edge or Zen server. And then if you you do some analytics on the phone, but you want to do what maybe you're already doing where you're running some big analytics up in the cloud on Azure or AWS. You can continue to use whatever solution you're using there, or you can go to, we have this data flow and Avalanche that have these data connectors, and they will move the data from the Zen server to them to do the big time analytics. Admittedly, they are different products, so there would be ETL there. So I can't claim full ETL all the way through to the analytics engine, but I can claim it up to the cloud. So is this an eye test, or can you guys actually read it? So this is just a graphic showing where we see these versions of Zen running. We've got Zen Core running on various devices. We have a Zen Enterprise Server, which is a full Zen implementation, but it's more a traditional database, multi-user, multi-client. But as I said, the exact same database. Just it's really just packaged differently. It's an executable instead of a library, and it's licensed differently. Oh, as long as I'm talking about licensing, one of the questions I've been getting in the booth is, how is this licensed? How much does it cost? We're not a service. You buy it from us, and we give it to you, and it's yours. There's no monthly fee. The licensing is based on user count or device count, but if you, in the Android world, and we've seen this with some of the internet apps that we support, there's an unlimited license. You just pay once and then it's yours. The only time you would have to pay again, and you get support with it, the only time you'd have to pay again is major version upgrades. If you want to go from say 14 to 15, there'll be a fee. Honestly, I'm not in sales, I'm a developer. I do know that we're making a hard push into Android, and if you showed any interest at all, I'm sure you could get yourself a free copy to play with and a sweet deal if you really wanted it. I promised the marketing guys I would say that, but I know it's true. We're a small enough shop that I absolutely know that's true. Here's the 3 versions of Actian Zen we have. We have Cloud and Branch Remote Apps version. That's Zen Enterprise. That's your traditional server that you would think of as a database. We have something you might run on the IoT gateway, or let's say that you want to run an instance in various regions in AWS, and then you want to have a main server somewhere. You could run the main server somewhere and then have these edge servers in the various regions around the world that you want to support. And then you have the version that I'm talking about here, Zen Core, that runs on your embedded devices or your Android. People are curious how we managed to do NoSQL and SQL on the same file simultaneously. So if I haven't made that clear, I want to make sure I do. You can do NoSQL and SQL access to the same file, the same record, read, write, and we take care of all collisions. We take care of record locking if you want to use record locking. We take care of all that, and it's because of our architecture. On the lower half of this slide, you'll see something called the Zen Microkernel Database Engine. And that's really a fancy name for something that's pretty small but very cool. And what it is it's the guy that does all the reading and writing, right? So CRUD, it does the creation, the retrieval, the update and deletes of all the objects, whether it be JSON or fixed record, variable length record, whatever it is. It's also the one that takes care of OS and architecture, the CPU support. It's the one that makes sure that regardless of your OS, regardless of whether you're on Intel or ARM or NVIDIA, like a NVIDIA Jetson board, that all the data gets written the same way. The bytes are all in the same order, they're all the same width, and that's why this data is completely portable across architectures. And then built on that is this NoSQL layer and this SQL layer. And the SQL layer is a full ANSI SQL. So if you've got people running reports on the back end, they can still continue to write their SQL queries and run their reports. And then the NoSQL side is, if you come by the booth, I can show you some code. It's very straightforward. You you open a server, whether that be local or remote. You point it at a file, which is where you're going to persist your data, and you do reads and writes, updates and deletes. And it really could not be more straightforward. It's object-oriented, so you instantiate a client, and you instantiate a file, and that's either you can create it or open an existing file. Another thing, when we did this prototype a couple years ago, we were thinking, well, surely this works, but surely we got to worry about performance, right? What are we going to have to do to fix our performance? So we hired a company to compare us against 4 databases, and I have 3 of the slides here. The 4th one somehow didn't make it in the deck. I apologize, but we compared against SQLite because we know that's been around a while. A lot of folks use it. It's available everywhere. We were very pleased to find out that we outperformed SQLite significantly. Of course, I picked the best graph out of the series of graphs in the white paper, but if you go to our website, you'll see that we have the 4 white papers there. Admittedly, a database has to just be fast enough, right? But people always like to talk performance numbers, so I put this up there. We also did it against Couchbase, which we did well against, and InfluxDB. The other one we did was MongoDB. I don't think it's been through management yet, so I didn't put it up here because they want to give the nod and make sure that they want to release it. Another thing I should say about MongoDB is MongoDB, right, is really good. And I believe that's the one that you can shard and you can scale. It's really designed for large instances, right, large data operations. We're not, right? So don't think of us as something you're going to push up to the server and run and support thousands and thousands of devices. We have other databases for that, or you can use your own, one of your choice. What we're talking about is on the phone, maybe in instances in the cloud where the phones call into or they push data down to, and then you have an analytics engine behind that. So we support hundreds or thousands of users per Zen server instance, depending on your workload. But the beauty of it is that it's the same database that you run both on the server and on the phone. So this is what I want to talk about. This one was this infographic is really designed toward IoT, but it gets the story across, right? So in the top left here, you've got a device that maybe's got an embedded Android engine in it, and it's writing flat files, just ad hoc metadata being written there or something, and then it's maybe using Berkeley DB to store data. And then you've got a phone over here that's using SQLite to store data. Maybe the devices out there are talking to a gateway that's running MySQL, and then they all get pushed up to some sort of medium-sized server that's running Postgres before they get pushed up to the cloud at some point for analytics to be run on them. And what we're trying to stress here is not only do you have different databases, so you have different APIs and you have different expertise required in-house to support all these, you also have this ETL, and that's what I was talking about before, where you have to extract the data from whatever it's in, transform it so that it's suitable to be loaded into the next thing upstream. And not only is this complicated, error-prone, and insecure, you've got to have that knowledge, right? So there's got to be somebody who understands all of those things. And the way we see the world is here. So there's a version of Zen that runs both on that smart pump, on the phone, on the gateway, and in the first level of the server, the repository, right? Everything's the same. So once the data is encrypted, it stays encrypted. The API is the same everywhere. And if that's good enough, you're done. Now, if you do need to run some big time analytics, or you're supporting tens of thousands of users and your write load is fairly heavy, you will need to find something else to move that data into, quite honestly. So I promised you a case study. This is Pure Logic. They're out of Canada. They do this school management program. So I saw them do a presentation. It's really, you badge into school, you badge into your class. They track assets. It's kind of like if you need to know where a kid is now, you know where he is, that kind of thing. And they just they're very, very popular in the Canadian school system, apparently, and they've been doing some enhancements to their program. So here's their architecture. They're running a web portal in an office, so there's a local workstation in the school, I believe. And they've got this mobile app that runs. They've got their Windows server, I believe, as well. They're running JSON, so they've got some NoSQL kind of thing going on with that. And they've got C++, and then I don't think it says it here, but I believe they have some Java as well. And so they're sitting on 2 versions of Zen. They've got the Zen running embedded on the phones, and then I believe they also have special purpose devices in the classroom. They've got RFID readers in the classroom so the kids can badge in when they come in. That's all done with the embedded database, and then they have the enterprise database running, I think, at the school level where all that information gets sent to. They were very worried about encryption and security. Obviously, people were a little creeped out about that information about their child being stored everywhere, and they wanted it to be kept very, very secure. When they first started doing the project, they were going to use SQLite, but they changed their mind midstream. And this is straight out of their stuff. I didn't write this. This is from them. So they liked the fact that the NoSQL API was available from multiple languages. And they also liked the fact that on the server, they could just write SQL to do their queries. That was a big thing for them. The consistent data management platforms, so one license, same API if you're writing the same NoSQL API everywhere. And that was causing them trouble because I think they actually had more than just SQLite originally, so one of their goals was to run the same API everywhere. But what they found out with SQLite was you can't run that on the server and support multiple users easily, right? It's not really designed for multi-user, I don't believe, or multi-device. The encryption, de-encryption I mentioned, that's very secure data, and you design your application, of course, to be very secure and not expose that data, but it's much easier if it just stays encrypted the whole time. That's one less thing you have to worry about. They love the fact that they could take this Zen code and move it straight to the mobile device to a great extent, and it just worked. Once again, because it's the same API. And last but not least, we're very comfortable working with OEMs. That's what we've done for years. You can buy a shrink wrap version of Acti and Zen if you want, or download it and run it on your box. But most people don't know about us because we're not an end user product. We sell to people who write software. A perfect non-Android example would be we support dentist office software. So these people that write software for dentist offices, they know how to write software for dentist offices, right? They know how to do medical records and things like that, but they don't want to get in the business of maintaining their own database and all that entails. So they buy us, they embed us in their product, and then they add their stuff, right? Their business logic on top of it. Another example is, GameStop uses us, but that's more of a point of sale thing. I don't know if I was supposed to say their name, so don't repeat that. But anyway, and then a few other places. So like I said, we're very comfortable with OEM. We're very comfortable with being embedded. That's what it's designed to be. Even though it's a full-level database, that's really, really what it's designed to be. It's designed to be embedded. And now we want to be embedded in Android apps. And that is it. I'm way early, I think. So are there any questions about anything? I never stopped for a breath, I don't think. So anything confusing, like what the heck did I just say, kind of thing? Okay, well, you're either all asleep or I did a really good job.